Welcome to Complex Creatures, exploring spirituality and the common good.
If we're honest, most of us carry a rather complicated relationship with technology, but in particular, the devices we carry in our pocket or we put in front of our face each day. They connect us, they inform us, they entertain us, but they also shape us and mold us, and often in ways we don't fully understand. Today on Complex Creatures, the podcast where we think about spirituality and the common good, I'm joined by Dillon Thornton, a pastor and theologian in the evangelical tradition. We're going to talk about his book, Deathly Devices, Our Ever-Present Portals to Seven Ancient Sins. It's a fascinating exploration on how the classic language of the seven deadly sins helps us understand spiritual formation happening through our screens, whether consciously or unconsciously. It's not just a conversation about technology. It's one where we talk about desire and habit and identity and even gender, what it means to be formed as a follower of Christ in a world that is constantly forming us in other ways. I think you're going to find this illuminating, but more so probably challenging. I'm thankful for Dillon for participating, and I'm thankful for you listening. If this show is meaningful to you, like and subscribe and share with a friend. Thank you for joining Complex Creatures. Today on Complex Creatures, we have my friend Dillon Thornton, who has written this lovely book, Deathly Devices, Our Ever-Present Portals to Seven Ancient Sins. And friends, if you're like me, you've been paying attention to all this news going on about AI and many developments and technology. So it's a really important time for us to be thinking more sincerely about our relationship to technology. Dillon, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Jarrod. Thanks so much for the invite. Great to be with you today.
I wanted to first ask what drew you to start thinking about modern technology and the seven deadly sins, which is the angle of your book. What pulls you in that direction?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think most of my writing grows out of either a question I have that I'd like to think more deeply about, or a specific need that I see in our own congregation here in the Tampa Bay area. And I suppose Deathly Devices was a bit of both. I saw how my own family and the various stages of life represented in our church family all were moving in and out of this social media ecosystem without really thinking much about what this way of life is doing to us as followers of Christ. And so I set out to explore the question, what does untempered attachment to our devices do to us? How does it deform or misshape us? And this exploration began as a sermon series, actually, that I did here at Faith Church in 2023, I think it was. And the series was so well received that I decided to work on the content a little bit more, beef up the footnotes, tidy up the writing, and publish it with the hope that it would be beneficial for the wider Christian community. So I was just interested in exploring this. The seven deadly sins. I knew I wanted to be as specific as I could be regarding the deformative effects of our devices. Many people have a general sense that untempered attachment is not good for us. And we now have decades of data to consider, 20 to 30 years of men and women, boys and girls wielding these personal devices that allow essentially uninterrupted access to social media, videos, games, infinitely more. And I think many of us would say that this generation raised on devices doesn't seem to be more human, more humane. In fact, none of us who live online seem to be more alert to spiritual realities or focused on the kingdom of God.
Mm.
So we have this general anecdotal assessment of the situation that isn't very positive. And I wanted to add some specificity. What exactly is happening to us? And so somewhere along the lines, I decided to frame the book around the seven deadly sins.
Well, you are a pastor and a theologian, and you're working out of the broad evangelical tradition. But what's your specific tradition? Let's locate you in that map.
Yep. So I'm the lead pastor at Faith Community Church and Schools in the Tampa Bay area. I've been here since 2017, and we are an EPC congregation, so Evangelical Presbyterian Church.
I'm guessing that the seven deadly sins aren't like the grammar that just surround the language of a lot of your church people, right? Like that may sound like very old world, certain medieval tended, unless someone saw the movie Seven, I don't think a lot of contemporary Christians think in terms of seven deadly sins.
I think you're right.
Do you find that the tradition of thinking of these sins this way to be helpful?
I do, and you're right. It was, I think, at least somewhat new for our congregation. So I spent a decent amount of time in the introduction of that sermon series that then became the book, talking about vices, virtues. A vice or its counterpart of virtue is a habitual disposition or a character trait, a way of being, is how I speak of it in the book. And we can cultivate positive or negative character traits over time through repeated actions. Virtues are excellences of character, vices are failures of character. Or we could say that the former are ways of living well in God's world, and the latter are ways of living poorly, having a corruptive and a destructive effect on ourselves and others. And as a list of vices similar to the one that I use in the book was first compiled by the fourth century writer Evagrius of Pontus. It's interesting. I think that Evagrius joined a monastic community, deliberately withdrawing from the wiles of the world, and then, rather ironically, there in the desert, a member of this community created with the hope of a deeper experience of God. He and his fellow monks actually became better acquainted with their own sin. um,
Right.
so that's a bit ironic, I think. And then by the 13th century, Aquinas develops the list that I follow in the book. So I do think it's helpful. In particular, I have found the Christian tradition to be very helpful in singling out these vices because they're source vices. So if we picture a spiritual battle, these vices are the generals, with other vices serving as their foot soldiers. Or to use the image that was common in the Middle Ages, if we picture a forbidding tree, these vices are the main branches. From each of the seven grows many smaller branches, each of those likewise bearing toxic fruit.
When I think of devices and the device paradigm or the general philosophy of technology, and I compare it or put it alongside spirituality, I've seen and heard a lot of responses, from holiness traditions where people tend to really double down and being, in the world but not of the world, will actually call certain technological advancements sinful. The Mennonite community, or specifically parts of the Amish community, don't simply just disavow technology. They actually deeply consider new technologies based on what it will do to the community. Like, I think it's a prudent approach. And now today we have technology being put alongside of spirituality all the time as we're trying to think about AI and what does it mean to be human. So I guess it's a jumbled stew. It's a mess. How are these devices not necessarily sinful in and of themselves, but capable of amplifying sin? And is this what you mean by portals when you speak in that language?
Yeah, it is. It is. Sin has infected humanity since the time of Genesis 3. Lists of capital vices have circulated since at least the fourth century. But I think the innovations of our day constitute a unique challenge. In our technological moment, most of us have on our persons nearly every second of the day a device that possesses great power, including the power to awaken these vices within us. I mean, in my pocket, I do have a portal that can carry me to countless evil places. So where we can say that Evagrius had sinful tendencies in his heart, we have sinful tendencies in our hearts, and an almost omnipresent technology with the capacity to incite those tendencies. So it's sort of like we're recovering alcoholics who live in a bar. Not for a moment can we let down our guards.
Yeah. So some people want to talk about technologies being, or devices as being neutral, right? Morally neutral. How do you think through that?
So that's actually one of my favorite questions to ask when I'm teaching technology and spiritual formation to middle school and high school students. They're always
Mm,
keen to discuss this subject. Some of them thinking themselves experts on the topic since they've spent more
sure.
time with their iPhones than with every flesh and blood person in their lives combined, probably. And so
Right.
I usually begin the discussion with that very question: Is technology good, bad, or neutral? And nearly every student responds neutral, and then I tell them that it's a trick question. I've been helped here by Melvin Kranzberg's article,
Hmm.
"Technology and History," published some 40 years ago now, I guess. And Kranzberg says technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. And by this, I think what he means is that it's just not as simple as dropping a gadget into an ethics machine and then waiting for it to come out the other side stamped as either virtuous or sinful. In reality, the inherent sinfulness or virtue associated with a given technology is often pretty vague until a person wields the tool with intent. So the same technology can have different results when introduced in different contexts or in different ways. Nuclear technology, for example, offers the prospect of unlimited energy resources, but also the possibility of worldwide destruction. And kind of to help us get the point, Kranzberg tells this little story. He says that once after a concert, a lady rushed to the great violinist Fritz Kreisler and said, "Maestro, your violin makes such beautiful music." And Kreisler held his violin up to his ear and replied, "I don't hear any music coming out of it."
Right.
And of course, the point is when man wields the technology, and especially as he wields it over time, we begin to see more clearly the good or the bad, the beautiful or the ugly. So I think the short answer is it's just not as simple as saying it's all neutral. And so this whole social media space is a neutral space, and it really just matters what types of conversations you're having in this space. I'm fairly uncomfortable with the language of neutrality.
Mm. I get really concerned about the idea of our devices or our relationship to our device paradigm turning us into the devices, right?
Mm, mm.
Laying claim over our agency in some way. How do you feel about that? What I'm saying, does that make sense? Do you see some of that?
Unpack that a little bit more and tell me exactly what you mean.
Well, I mean, we could go to the worst case scenario. We've all seen science fiction and think about how there's a version where AI itself becomes like an overlord over humanity, but we really don't have to go that far at all. We can see how we've become addicted to the algorithmic nature of things and how we become. We are. They say if you don't see any advertisement, if they're not, you're the product. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right, like these things become make us a cog in the machine. I always tell my people in sermons that I preach where I'll bring up social media, um, and I like to say, you're probably the one person in this congregation listening to this who thinks I never post about things that are political or polarizing, and then there's that moment where you just can't take it anymore, and you say, and you live that long post that says, I never do this, but here I'm going to finally share. And you do it in good faith, thinking that people you know and love are going to receive it in good faith. But the reality is, the way the algorithms work, it's going to be weaponized, it's going to be
Yeah.
served up and to make someone else angry to keep them on longer. So you have now
Yeah.
become part of the device yourself, right? Like that,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's that bothers me deeply, and I'm not sure we have an answer for it except for to be aware of it.
Awareness, yeah, absolutely. I think we have to have a heightened awareness of what's happening. I talk about in my chapter on avarice that we do sort of live in this post-ad world, but the reality is, the influencer industry. Since that has been around, we really are now always looking at ads. I mean, there is this. There's almost no line between this influencer personality and sort of the product that he or she is representing. In many cases, they're just so together that as we, the viewer, are sitting there listening to or watching this influencer, we're really being sold something. The analogy I use is my sons when they were younger loved an influencer named Brixie, who just is a Lego guy. He just builds Legos. He's got this massive sort of Lego collection in his basement, and he never is actively trying to sell Legos. He's just talking about Legos and building Legos all the time. And when my boys were younger, they were always saving their money for, guess what? Legos, of course, right? So
Right.
that I do think there is a system out there that we have to kind of be aware of and understand. It is not as simple as me just getting on social media and looking at something. No, somebody's trying to sell me something. Somebody's getting information from me. Somebody is moving me in the direction that they want me to go. And then, of course, the question is, well, who is that somebody? And that's a whole other complicated issue.
Yes, yes. So let's talk. You mentioned avarice. Let's talk about some of these sins, some of these seven deadly sins, and ways that they are amplified through our devices. I don't know if there's one in particular that you would like to start with, but pride is such an important vice to be aware of. How do devices feed pride?
Right. Yeah. And so I kind of in the beginning of that first chapter, and there's some discussion in the oldest lists of these vice lists of whether pride or vainglory. And I go with vainglory in particular, and
Mm,
I kind of draw out the distinction between the two. I think there is a slight distinction. So Vainglory is not common in our vocabularies today, certainly not. We might be inclined to think it's exactly the same as pride. I think they're slightly different. Pride is, I think, more concerned with excellence, and vainglory is more concerned with appearance, we might say. So the prideful person wants superior status. He or she values being number one on the team or number one in a certain field of study. The vainglorious person wants superior notice, with or without the excellence. They just want to be noticed. And so we can look at social media, of course, and see how this is really the platform where everyone is out there trying to get noticed. They want the affirmation. They want people to recognize them for something, even if it's just nothing that they've accomplished necessarily. They just kind of want that popularity and recognition. So I think that's a dominant part of the entire social media ecosystem that we do have to be aware of, especially for young people. I think this can be tremendously hurtful for young people, and this has come out in Jonathan Haidt's work and others. So that's one of the ones that, as I was doing the research and writing for the book, vainglory and probably envy is the other one that I think has really been personally convicting in my own life and pastoral ministry context. But yeah, I could talk about any of these, I suppose.
Yeah, I just took Instagram and Facebook off of my like app screen, home screen on my phone, because I found myself the other day. I was at my pastor's study at the church, and I just pulled it out, and my fingers immediately went there, and then I just was scrolling, and I noticed I was just scrolling through advertisements, and then that was the thing that burst the bubble for a moment. And I'm like, Why am I doing this?"
Mhm.
And so I took them off that, because I don't really enjoy my experience with those or other social media platforms. I just feel like I have to be there because of my job as a pastor and a theologian. I feel like the engagement's important. I don't think I do them well, but still, you feel like you have to do it, and I find that it does increase that envy, which I think is pretty well documented. But I mean, even in like I train jujitsu. I know that you've done a lot of CrossFit. I mean, you can easily see even a friend who's making gains or progress when you were on vacation and feel bad about yourself,
That's right. That's right.
instead of being happy for them.
Yeah, yeah. I noticed that in myself as well. I noticed that I would populate my digital communities with the very people I was most inclined to envy. I mean,
Wow.
I can hear someone sing a beautiful song, and I don't envy that person because that's not my gift. I'm not a musician, so I'm not inclined to envy them. But I would populate my digital communities with exactly what you just said: other pastors, other authors, other CrossFitters. Those are the very ones that I'm tempted to envy because those are my gifts, and in my flesh, I want to be the most gifted. Right?
hmm That's right. So sloth's very fascinating. I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding of sloth because of maybe some translation, and maybe because there's a cute animal named the sloth. I don't know. How do you understand sloth, just as a device itself? How do you understand it?
Yeah.
And then let's talk about how devices can promote sloth.
Sure. Yeah, sloth probably is the least thought of the seven, least thought about of the seven. And when it is thought about, likely it's pictured as the lightweight of the group. Maybe it seems less
Mm.
sinister, less serious. But from the perspective of Christian theology, sloth is a disregard for God as a giver, a wasteful response to His abundant blessings, and apathy toward our kingdom calling. So in the book, I talk about it really can't be the lightweight sin of the group, the lightweight vice of the group, because of the great commandment, which is all about love. And so sloth is this apathy toward our kingdom calling of love, right? And so the way that technology and our devices can incite that is they just draw us in to this kind of lostness, the very thing that you just talked about that have experienced and I have as well. We just find ourselves scrolling, and we've wasted so much of our time and so much of our day doing things that really don't have any sort of certainly have eternal significance at all. They really don't have they don't matter for much. And now I'm here. There was 30 minutes gone, hour gone. Who knows how much of our time that we've wasted? So I think it's very easy to kind of just fall into that aspect of sloth. But the other part is. Um, I think one of the great temptations when we spend our lives online is that we would say we become very concerned about these great problems that exist somewhere out there in the world. but that in many ways we can't do much about.
Right.
And we're less invested in things on the local level where I really can't do something about this. So sort of the old idea that everybody wants to change the world, but nobody's willing to do the dishes.
Hmm.
I think we're kind of drawn into that aspect of sloth as well. I can seem very emotional and passionate about these, great problems on the world level. I'm not really doing anything to love my community well.
That's right. There's a line in an old Mumford and Sons song that when it came out, I was working a lot with young adults at the time, and it's if only I had an enemy greater than my apathy, then I could have won. And I would think about how profoundly challenging apathy is,
Mhm.
because when you simply don't care to care, like how do you? I mean, it's almost like an acidic sort of eroding emotion or experience. Like it's very hard to rouse someone into caring about things that matter, especially when they are just pacified,
Yeah.
maybe by scrolling or whatever it is. And you mentioned, I mean, I had a seminary professor, who's a greatly learned and spiritual man who was very vulnerable and made a confession once about how he had overcome an addiction to internet pornography. And we all sat like a bunch of young men and women sat there at the feet of a guy who we respect spiritually, theologically, intellectually, as he said the most practical problems of pornography. He said, "Do you know how much time you waste? You know how much time you sit there and you just fritter away?" And it's like that. So many things online are like that, whether it has to do with pornography or even shopping, right? Just
Yeah.
fritter away time. So we could unpack all these devices and these vices that you've written about, but let's go a little deeper. How does all of this start to build an identity or form our identity or malform our identity?
Yeah, well, I think kind of going back to the way I talked about virtues and vices earlier in the conversation. If we understand that these are habitual dispositions, character traits, ways of being, and that we're cultivating these either positive or negative character traits over time through repeated actions. So when I am choosing to live in this state of permanent connectivity, that is working on me. That's doing something to me. It is misshaping me. And I think I talk about in the introduction to the book, and I suppose if there's maybe one thing that someone takes away from the book, I think I would want it to be this, and that is that we must begin to think of our devices in terms of spiritual formation.
Mhm.
Our devices mimic Jesus's call to discipleship. So
Mhm.
in John 15, Jesus says, "Abide in me, and I in you.
Mhm.
For apart from me, you can do nothing." That's spiritual formation 101, right? Jesus doesn't say, "Apart from me, you can do a few things." He doesn't say, "Apart from me, you'll accomplish only lesser goals." But apart from me, you can do nothing. Well, our devices assert themselves similarly. My iPhone's
Mhm.
claim on me is, apart from me, you can do nothing. You can't make friends. You can't find a spouse. You can't be productive enough to get promoted. You can't remain knowledgeable about the world, and on it avers. So our devices are mimicking Jesus' call to discipleship: abide in me and I in you. And we have to be aware of that, and aware of the fact that if we are going to abide in
Mhm.
our devices and allow them to abide in us, if we're going to be a disciple of the Lord called digital, we are going to find that we will be slowly yet surely fashioned into a new creation. But not every new creation is a pretty one.
Yeah, what you're saying reminds me of James K. A. Smith's secular liturgies project. He talked a lot about basically we do what we love, and that what we love forms us, and it's the rituals that we put in our lives that shape our identity and our formation. And like you just said, abide in me is a language of Christ, whereas our phones are asking for that same thing. And
Mhm.
many of us wake up and we have a ritual to first things first, look at the phone, check in on
Yes.
whatever app or whatever, connect, check the email. And there's all these different things that become so habitual that when they're you can feel it when they're removed. So when I
That's
took
right.
away the Instagram stuff, my thumb still goes over to the missing spot. I'm trying to detox, as it were, from that.
I can relate. I can relate to that, brother. I can relate to that.
Yeah. So, how can the church help? Like, as we are communities of faith trying to help spiritual formation and to basically create a different form of humanity, how can we help each other navigate these strange relationships we have to the devices in our pockets and in our lives?
Yeah, I'll speak first to maybe the individual person within the church, and then a little bit more about what pastors in the church, the wider community, can do. I guess if there's someone out there who's just feeling very overwhelmed by their current habits with technology, I would say three or four things. I would say first, you actually can live without it. You really can. And secondly, maybe you should live without it at least for a while. If we're talking about social media, the social internet, just for a while to see what you notice about yourself. Third, I would say prioritize the spiritual disciplines. Of course, read the Bible, pray, experience fellowship with other believers, gather for worship with your church family. And when I say read the Bible, just a brief note on that, I'm talking about the type of Bible for which pine trees had to die, whose paper now can enact the tree's revenge by slicing your finger. Right? If it's not, if you can't feel the texture of the paper, it's not the type of Bible reading I have in mind. In 2023, I think it was, there was a fascinating book published by John Dyer called "People of the Screen." People of the Screen.
Mm.
And Dyer's research reveals that while reading on a screen has a positive effect on reading frequency, it actually has a negative effect on comprehension. So
Right.
screen-based Bible students read more often, and they have better completion rates for reading plans and things like that, but they actually understand less. So they're opening their glowing Bibles more often, but they're walking away with less and less light. So try to practice the spiritual disciplines. Try reading an old-fashioned Bible, and then the last thing I would say to that person who maybe is struggling with their habits of technology is establish some personal or family principles of disengagement. I've tried not to be overly prescriptive about this in the book, recognizing that each person or family is going to need to think through these issues carefully. But my hope is that many conversations will commence between husbands and wives and pastors and children. And to borrow language from Andy Crouch, some tech wise practices will follow. So that's kind of for the individual. Within the context of the wider community, the Christian community, pastors, I think we need to model healthy habits. Paul says to Timothy, "Watch your life and your teaching," and watching our lives means keeping an eye on how we ourselves use technology of various kinds, modeling the very habits we hope to see in our congregation. I think we also need to help our people connect the dots, preaching and teaching on this subject. I hope the book I've written will be of some help, a resource for other pastors out there. And then I know some churches have encouraged a tech fast of some sort, maybe during the season of Lent. I think this is especially helpful when the entire church commits to it. For that middle school girl, it's a lot easier for her to take a break from social media when all of the other middle school girls in the church youth group are also taking a break from social media. So that communal aspect is a very powerful thing. And then lastly, organizing opportunities for families to come together and to express their struggles, and discuss some possible solutions and best practices when it comes to technology in the household. I think that's a very helpful way of getting at this too.
And for the last few minutes, I'd like to spend on the topic of young men. Um, I have been, in the past several years, concerned about boys and men, and I've read widely on those concerns of both from people who are politically on left and right, and now it's like being more accepted that there is a problem with so many young men and what it means to be a man, and of course we have the presence of the manosphere and a lot of toxicity out there that is or I would say very vice driven sorts of aspirations. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but at any rate, there's all that, and you, of course, had to deal with wrath in this book. I think a lot of young men are angry, and I was really smiled a little bit when you were talking about lust, and you talked about what pornography is like, and then you said Jesus was the manliest guy in history, or so. I'm paraphrasing. So and you're a man yourself. Is there a certain way that you feel like technology has been or devices have been more or in a unique way detrimental to young men?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think you've pinpointed it well when it comes to wrath and lust. Most assuredly,
Hmm. Hmm.
I think internet pornography is a terrible problem, and the reality is that probably most of the men in our congregations have been exposed to it. I think the last stat that I saw is that the first exposure to online pornography for boys these days happens around the age of somewhere between 9 and 11,
Mm.
which is just crazy to even think about. But what's happening is that I think it's leading so many men to dehumanize women.
Mm.
Lust involves objectification, dehumanization. Strictly speaking, lust doesn't want a woman; it wants an experience for which a woman is the necessary apparatus, as C.S. Lewis puts it in the Four Loves. So
Mm.
lust craves it rather than cherishing her. It's a dehumanizing thing. So I think that's exactly what online pornography is is inciting, and is that's how it's misshaping men. Is it is teaching us to dehumanize, and we have to push back against that from within the Christian tradition and explain. Now, that's not what manhood is about at all.
Mm. Yeah, I think that so much of what happens on through social media, uh, at first blush looks really good. You think, oh, this is going to connect me to people all over the world. So, I can check in on my family who live across the country. And then if you are, if you're a young middle school kid now and you have kind of niche interests. When I was growing up, you were probably sort of isolated and lonely, but now you can find your tribe of people who have the same niche interest across the country. And that's got an upside. The downside is we don't learn how to invest in those who are right around us, or we can withdraw from that. And then I think that what has actually happened in practice is we believe as we're sitting at our screens that we're more connected to the world than ever before, but because of the algorithm's nature, we actually see less and less of it. It's curated for us, and so our view becomes smaller. And so we can find ourselves in currents or in communities that form us into thinking certain things about what manhood is, or what healthy sexuality is. And before we know it, we could already have fed ourselves the lie a number of times and bought into it, and had a misshaped information. So many things to say about it, and it seems like to be a hard time to grow up. I think it seems to be a challenging time to grow up.
Yeah, and it's not always easy to discern, when these things are happening to us, right? We spend so much
Mhm.
time in the digital sphere. I think we need to have regular times of, I'll just call it, autobiographical excavation, some self study that we're
Mhm.
doing. Part of our spiritual formation is hunting the vermin that have burrowed into our hearts.
Yeah.
We understand the shape and the scope of Christian faithfulness by studying the Bible, but knowing where we stand in relation to that standard involves studying ourselves. So we
Mhm.
need we need regular times of confession. We need to do that unearthing of the heart and life that brings a deeper awareness of our sin and the paths that are leading us to that sin.
Yeah, and the 12-step program, they call it the moral inventory, which I often take that and say, I wish the church listened more carefully to the 12 steps, because the sincerity and honesty with which you actually take that project on is it's without shame, and it helps. It helps when we really do a sincere look,
Yeah.
excavation, as you say. Um, Dylan, this has been a lovely conversation. Thank you for your book. Deathly Devices, our ever-present portals to seven ancient sins, published by it's Cascade Books. I encourage anyone to take a look at this book and be challenged and grow through it. I'm taking a small group through it, as I mentioned to you before we started recording. Where can people learn more about this book, your work, any other projects you're working on?
Yeah, sure. They can find the book on Amazon or anywhere books are sold these days. Can check out our church website, faithseminole.org. And anybody who's in the Tampa Bay area, I would love for you to come and visit with us. Love to meet you in person.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Jared, so much.